Design is my passion. Hi, and welcome to I'm Talking to You, which is right there, as you can see by the sign. So, what I want this to become, the way I am dubbing this, is a type of conversational diary. So, I'm going to be undergoing something major in a few days, and I want to kind of document it. But I also want to make it in a way that people can relate to it and contribute their own experiences. And, we have like a bit of a jumping board for different topics and different aspects on what it's like to live with chronic illnesses, like endometriosis and my own super rare genetic disorder, HLRCC. So, just to introduce myself, for those of you who already may know this, I'm sorry if this is old information, but my name is Sandra. I am 26 years old. I hate the way I said my name. My name is Sandra. That's too official. No, that's too weird. My name is Sandra. I am 26 years old. I live in New York City. And I will be undergoing a hysterectomy on Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday, March 30th, which is 3 days away. What am I doing? I should be relaxing and playing The Sims. I was diagnosed with Endo, and then 2 years later, I was diagnosed with a super ultra rare genetic disorder called HLRCC, hereditary leiomyomatosis renal cell carcinoma. And the way I got to my second diagnosis was by my first one, which I will explain all of this because I know it sounds super vague and weird. But I want to stress in the first part of this video, I really, really want to stress that I'm not having a hysterectomy because of endo, because a hysterectomy is not a cure for endometriosis. Anyone who tells you otherwise, whether it's an OBGYN, whether it's an endo specialist, whether it's a doctor on TikTok or, a thread on Twitter or some idiot at work or someone who is inserting themselves into your business when you didn't ask them to, a hysterectomy is not a cure for endo. A hysterectomy is not a cure for endo. There's no cure for endo. But the closest thing that we have to, if you want to say, going into remission and getting relief from symptoms and having some sort of quality of life, is the current treatment is laparoscopic excision surgery. That's kind of the gold standard, where a skilled surgeon, a skilled endometriosis specialist, goes in laparoscopically and looks for lesions around the pelvis and abdomen and removes them instead of cauterizing them, instead of burning them or ablating them, which is ablation surgery. That also doesn't work that well. But I really just wanted to put that forward first, that I am not having a hysterectomy because of my endo. I am having it because of this other rare condition. So that's why I think I am going to title this first episode The Perfect Storm, because it kind of, basically, this first episode I wanted to be my story, just an introduction to myself, who I am, what I've gone through, and how I want to go about this series, going forward with ITTY, I'm talking to you, and, kind of documenting this whole thing and letting people know, opening the door to more conversation that, some people don't just have endo, they also have other chronic illnesses that they have to manage on top of this, which is already difficult in and of itself. So it can get very difficult to juggle and try and manage and survive. So why did I say survive so weird? I don't know, I'm so nervous. I want people to know that they're not alone in case they feel like they're, that what they have is so weird and strange and difficult to manage that there are other freaks out there. There are other weirdos, and we are trying our best. So maybe I should have named the podcast or the series, whatever this is, maybe I should have named it, I Know We're All Trying Our Best. Let's get into this. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to I'm Talking to You ASMR. This is the worst type of ASMR you will ever listen to. Imagine someone with acid reflux just speaking into your ear for a few hours. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Yeah. Try being me. So I want to get into what my symptoms were that led me to my endometriosis diagnosis. And then what led me to my HLRCC diagnosis, and how I got to the point where I am today, which is 3 days away from my hysterectomy at 26. So I started developing symptoms, my endo symptoms, around 21, I would say. I was in college and I was working full-time. I was working 3 jobs. I was in college full-time, and I was kind of all over the place, and my cycles started to go haywire. So I would have 19-day long cycles, and then I would have 42-day long cycles. And there was no in between. It was either super short or super long, but in either case, I would have like 8 days worth of bleeding. I passed clots the size of quarters, and I seemed to be running through pads like crazy, you know, and it's a very expensive thing to have to buy into. My cycles were going haywire, and I went to my then family doctor, and I told her, you know, I can't predict when my period's going to come, and every time it does come, it seems to get worse and worse and worse, right? And it's really scary at that age, you know, not being able to predict when you're going to get your period, because, you know, I'm running from one job to another, and at school, I'm at college, and what if I get my period in the middle of class? What if I stand up and, you know, it's every person's nightmare. Every person who ovulates, it's their nightmare to stand up and to find a puddle of blood, or to wear white pants, or wear a dress, or anything of the like. And that was the type of fear that I lived in constantly, because I could never predict my cycles anymore. So I told her all of this, and she said, okay, well, we can do a pelvic ultrasound, right? And I went for a pelvic ultrasound, and guess what? Everything came back beautiful. My ovaries looked fine. My uterus looked fine. And she was like, I think it's stress. I think you just have to, you know, cut down on the work and stop stressing so much. Great advice, by the way. And, you know, everything is gonna balance itself out. So what did I know? I said, okay. And I did that. And I mean, I didn't cut down too much. I still had to work, and I still had to go to school. But I just kind of put it in the back of my mind, and I had to move on with my life. In the meantime, I developed other symptoms that I didn't realize were part of the problem, because they didn't seem to be directly related to my period. But in hindsight, of course, everything kind of clicked. One of my main symptoms was that for as long as I can remember, since I was a child, I've always had vaginal burning. And the way I could best describe it for people who don't know, or people who don't have vulvodynia, vaginal burning, is that it feels like you constantly have a UTI, but you don't have a UTI. And initially, I did have one UTI in my life. And since then, I was like, oh, well, if it was a UTI then, and I experienced vaginal burning then when I would pee, well, then this vaginal burning is probably a UTI too. So I was constantly running to the doctor's office and being like, almost every month I would go to urgent care and be like, I think I have a UTI. I think I have a UTI. I think I have a UTI. And it was like clockwork that at certain days of my cycle, like halfway throughout my cycle, day 12, day 13, day 22 of my cycle, I was burning. And I saw various doctors for this. I got advice ranging from somewhat helpful, from mildly helpful, to downright insulting and disgusting. You know, I had one very old man tell me, hey, you know, maybe you should, you know, you and your boyfriend should take showers before you have sex. And at the time, I wasn't even sexually active. I didn't even have a boyfriend at the time. And I was like, but I'm not. He's like, I know you're just saying that, sweetheart. I know you're just saying that. But, you know, make sure you both take showers. And I was so insulted. One, because I'm a massive germaphobe. I take 7 showers a day as it is. Pre-pandemic, I was taking 7 showers a day. But for someone to like, insinuate that this problem that I have, like, the cyclical problem that I have, almost monthly down to the day, that it's due to my lack of hygiene or something, it's so, it's insulting, but it's downright negligent. And that particular doctor gave me a lot of bad advice. So the vaginal burning was one symptom. Another symptom that I had developed that I didn't think could possibly be related was I started developing these really bad migraines. And I noticed a pattern that it was right before I was about to get my period, or while, like, the first 2 days of my period, I would be incapacitated with migraine. And it's migraine with aura, with nausea, with vomiting, and I still get those, unfortunately. But it was really bad, and it was to the point where I was going to neurologists, like, you know, I was terrified, is something wrong? Like, do I have a brain tumor or something? Like, you can't begin to fathom what is possibly going on in your body when you're a dumb 20-something-year-old and you've never had to deal with health issues before, and now all of a sudden, a bunch of these problems start arising, and they all seem to be different because they're different in nature, but you don't know at the time, and neither do the doctors that you're going to. No one can put the puzzle pieces together and be like, this sounds like this. This sounds like it's all part of a bigger thing. After, you know, my then family doctor gave me a clean bill of health and said she didn't know what was wrong, I saw a different doctor in the city who was a family friend of my boss at the time. And I was telling her all these symptoms, and it was one of the most embarrassing symptoms that kind of tipped her off, and that I heard the word endometriosis for the first time in my life. I was rattling off all these symptoms, you know, the vaginal burning, constant feeling like I have a UTI, crazy cycles, heavy bleeding, clotting, migraines, and then I said, I know this is really embarrassing, but I just have to mention it. And disclaimer, I have no shame talking about this stuff now because nothing means anything anymore. And the amount of doctors that I've seen in my lifetime, the amount of people that I've told this, it's just, I have no shame anymore. Like, ask me anything and I will answer 100% honestly. Like, there's no shame anymore. I said at the time, I was like, I know it sounds weird and I'm sorry if this is gross, but lately, I've been noticing that in order to do number 2, I have to lift my legs. I have to elevate my legs. If it's off the floor a few inches, if it's on the hamper, on the clothes hamper across from the toilet, I have to elevate my legs in order to go. And she stopped, and when I said that, she kind of leaned back and she said, have you ever heard of something called endometriosis? And I had no idea what it was at the time, and months later, I still didn't fully understand what it was, because I had seen a doctor after that she had referred me to. She said, you should go and see this guy. He's really great, and he's an endometriosis specialist, and, you know, he might be able to help you. So I took all of my MRIs and my test results, my blood work, my urinalyses, and I went to his office in early January of 2018. And at that point, I started to lose weight because I wasn't eating. I would take 2 bites of food and I would be instantly full, just because I developed gastritis and acid reflux. And I was always on the slender side throughout my life. So for me to lose weight, I'm 5'9", and for me to lose even more weight than I was already at was really alarming, because, I didn't know why I was losing weight, but I also wasn't eating the way I used to. And everything was really just getting super scary, super fast. Because I kept going to a bunch of specialists. I went to a gastroenterologist, I went to a neurologist, I went to a pulmonologist, and, every type of specialist you could think about, and everyone would kind of shrug and be like, well, everything up to this point is in my area of expertise, but right here, this here is totally different. You have to see a cardiologist for that. And it's like everyone has their own specialties, and no one works together. No one works together to be like, well, let's speak to this one and see what this one says and put the pieces together. Everyone just wants to do their own job, give you the clean bill of health so they can wash their hands and be like, well, we tried. Like, if there's nothing wrong from my end, maybe there's something wrong from the other end. And you keep spinning in this circle, and you keep spinning in a circle to the point where you're like, I'm the sick one. I can't keep dragging my tote bag full of test results from doctor's office to doctor's office while I feel like I'm fucking dying, So I went to him and I saw this guy, my first surgeon, my first endometriosis surgeon. He performed my first surgery, and he was the one who gave me my official endo diagnosis. At first, he didn't believe that I had endo because I wasn't a, quote, classic endo patient, right? He looked at me and he looked everything and he said, I don't know. I don't think you have endo. You don't sound like an endo patient. Because my symptoms were relatively acute. I didn't have this for the past 10 years, but at the time I was only 23. So, what kind of metric system do you have to compare? Like, well, you've only been suffering for a few months now, so you probably don't have endo, because most women suffer for like 10 years before they get a diagnosis. Meanwhile, they live with endo their whole lives, right? I was really scared when he said, I don't think you have endo, because it kind of felt like I had hit another dead end. I hit another wall. And I was like, well, if it's not this thing, then what could it possibly be? And he sent me out for another MRI, and I did even more testing, and I got, different results in different places. And in the end, I came back and I said, well, here's my most recent MRI and this and that. And he found that I had uterine fibroids, which a 23-year-old is really weird, right? I had about 5 fibroids, which weren't that small in size. And he said, well, the least I can do for you is go in, take those fibroids out, and if you happen to have endo, I'll take that out too. I felt like I was getting somewhere. I was like, okay, well, that explains the periods, having fibroids, and it's so weird that I would have it at this young age, but fuck it, like, maybe some people just get fibroids at a super young age. And my first surgery was in February of 2018. And supposed to run for 2.5 hours. It ended up being close to 6. I was under for 6 hours, and I had a 3-day hospital stay after that. And of course he found that I had endo. I had endo in 31 different sites throughout my abdomen and pelvis. And I also had uterine fibroids. I also had a unicornuate uterus, which is a very rare type of uterus where you have like this non-communicating half, like it's kind of like somewhat detached. And so I lost that small, they called it a rudimentary horn. I lost this small part of my uterus from the right side, and I lost my right fallopian tube. He also took out my appendix, so I had an appendectomy at the time, and he also found that I had fibrosis of the spleen. Even though at the time he insisted the spleen is the only the spleen is the only organ in the body where endo has not been found in patients. But now there's more and more mounting research that splenic endo is possible. At the time, of course, I was told, we have no idea what that is, but we also removed part of your spleen because we saw that it was diseased and we took it out. So I lost half of my spleen, half of my uterus, a fallopian tube, and my appendix, and a bunch of endo all in the same day. And time passed, and I unfortunately did not feel better. In fact, I feel like I started to get worse. My symptoms, my cycles were still completely out of whack. I was bleeding more and more heavily. I felt sicker. I was so tired all the time. I developed really bad nerve pain after that first surgery. And my urinary symptoms were just the same, if not worse, post-surgery. And I gave it, of course, time, the recovery period and the time it takes for everything to feel better. But going back to my endosurgeon, I would say, this feels weird, and I haven't really seen much of an improvement here. And every time he would point the finger back at me as though it was something that I had done wrong. He put me on several different medications, like for an overactive bladder. I didn't have an overactive bladder. He put me on colchicine or colchicine. It's a medication used for gout in gout patients. Of course that didn't help, because of course I didn't have gout. And for other things, he was just like, well, if you're having stomach issues, even though I had endo lesions on my bowel, he was like, well, I don't know why you're having pain there. Maybe you should go see a gastroenterologist again. And I would go see the GI, and he would be like, you just had surgery on your bowel. Go see him again. So everyone would spin me in a circle. And so at some point, him and the urologist that he worked with at the time, I kept coming back, and I was telling them my symptoms got worse. They decided that, hey, have you considered going on Xanax? You sound depressed. And I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I was going crazy. I was like, I feel these things. They're telling me that I should be on Xanax, which during that time I did end up having to go on Klonopin because I developed panic attacks from everything that was going on. And I was in therapy. I started going to therapy at the time because I couldn't begin to deal with all of this without my therapist. And Klonopin helped me get over the panic attacks, but I don't think the issue was I need to be on Xanax. I think the issue was I was getting worse after a surgery that was told to me by the surgeon that I would feel way better afterwards, right? He came to my room the next morning after my surgery with a bunch of residents in tow. And they looked at him like he was God, right? Like all surgeons have some degree of ego and some sort of God complex. But this guy in particular, he walked around the hospital like he was God. And he came to my room and he said, she was super sick and I took this, and this out. And tell them, you're feeling better, right? You're feeling better. And I was laying there in bed. I was like on a bunch of pain meds. And I'm like, I guess... of course I could engage if I was feeling better or not. It was hours after I had major surgery, right? I was told, oh, well, you should be feeling better. But then I would go back and I never once said, well, I think you did something wrong. Or are you sure you didn't do this, or that? I would just come back looking for relief. I was looking for relief from the constant pain. And I was made to feel like I was crazy, like I was making it up, or that it was in my head, or that this was somehow a personal attack on my surgeon. And so it came to a head in early June of 2018, which was a few months after my first surgery, that I went with my mom, and we sat in front of, my surgeon, and I told him, I said, I'm not feeling better. And I feel really, really sick. I feel really weak. I don't feel like the person that I used to be. I feel like a hollow shell of a person because I'm constantly tired. I'm still losing so much blood. I became anemic. I was never anemic prior to surgery, but I lost a lot of blood during surgery, and afterwards I continued to have these crazy cycles and this crazy clotting and this crazy bleeding that I became anemic. And I was like, I don't know how to deal with I was taking iron supplements and he put me on birth control and I was still bleeding, and I was like, I don't recognize myself physically. I said, what's going on with me? And he did a transvaginal ultrasound, and he said, well, the fibroids grew back. And I was in shock because I figured it was only a few months. How could this have grown back in such a short amount of time? And in those months between surgery and June, I started doing my own research, which unfortunately every single patient that I know who has endometriosis, you become the most knowledgeable person about your own disease. You can go see 20 GPs and maybe 10 of them will know what endo is, but not a single one of them will know as much as an endo patient does. I'm not just talking about the physical symptoms and the emotional and all of that. I'm talking about the actual facts about their own illness, because you have to be the one who advocates for yourself. You have to be the one who's reading the most recent published resources and the latest studies on how endo functions and how it works. And you always have to be the most educated person in the room as the patient. Endo is as common as diabetes, as asthma. It's 1 in 10 people have endo, if not more. When a man has erectile dysfunction, he goes to the doctor, he gets a pill, and it works. When you have a mounting list of symptoms for a disease that is so common and so prevalent and so debilitating, and you have to have multiple surgeries to see any degree of relief, you know that something is wrong. It's a very, very common disease, but it's an incredibly niche thing to have to talk about, which makes no sense whatsoever. I became more and more educated about what this actually was, and so I also learned what doesn't work, such as drugs like Lupron and Depo-Provera and Orilissa, which was approved in 2018. It's like a pill, it's like Lupron but in pill form. And these were all drugs like Lupron, Depo-Provera, Orilissa. They're all GnRH drugs, which basically means that they send you into early menopause, they shut down the ovaries, they send you into menopause, and they're a class of drugs that were created for the treatment of prostate cancer in men. So when you read online, Lupron is used to treat prostate cancer in men, and you read that word, cancer, and you're like, why am I being treated with a drug for cancer if I don't have cancer? Of course, there are drugs that have off-label uses and that they do work and they have their purposes and their functions. But when it comes to chemo and treating a condition that is not cancerous, it kind of seems like overkill, especially when it doesn't actually address the root of the problem. So I knew what these drugs were. And that's why when my first surgeon said to me, he said, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to go on a course of Lupron. We'll do it for 3 months. And then once we shrink the size of the fibroids, once the Lupron kicks in, I'll go and I'll do another surgery. And him mentioning that word Lupron to me just kind of set off the final red flag in a long trail of red flags that had already accumulated over the course of a few months. This red flag was kind of the biggest. It was the biggest one, and it was the final stake in the ground for me, really. And I said, I'm not going to do Lupron. At this point, I'm 5'9" and I weigh 99 pounds. I wouldn't be able to survive Lupron. I can't do this. And it kind of got to a very heated point at that time. It became an active argument between me and the doctor. And I said, I know what Lupron is, and I'm not going to do Lupron, and I'm not going to have a second surgery in less than 6 months. That's ridiculous. And he sort of, I guess it was more of an insult to his ego and to him himself. Instead of a patient advocating for themselves and asking why we're doing certain things, instead of, looking at a patient and wondering what's the best route of treatment for this particular case, you go on the offensive, you go on the defensive, it really shows who you are as a doctor. That someone coming to you and saying, I still feel sick, is a personal attack against you. So we got into a really heated argument, and he starts yelling at me. He said, oh, so you go on these online forums and you read about this and you think you know everything, right? You think you know everything. You think you know more than I do. And the way he came off as so defensive, and the fact that he was just yelling at me in his own office, it said everything I needed to know about this person. And I knew that it was time to leave. I knew it was time to leave and not look back and say goodbye to this person forever. I looked at my mom, and my mom was just in disbelief of what had just happened in front of her eyes. And I picked up my stuff and I said, okay, thank you. And I left, and I never went back. And he had continued to try and reach out to me. He had called me, left voicemails, emailed me and texted me and my mom, to the point where I was genuinely uncomfortable. The things that he was saying, and just weird shit, like, let's not leave things off this bad. And like, it kind of felt like I was dealing with a clingy ex-boyfriend and not a doctor. It was very strange. I went home that day, and it was a very dark day. I had felt the lowest that I had felt ever. I felt so hopeless. I was like, well, he's supposedly one of the best doctors in the world, and how could I feel this way? And, is there something wrong with me? If he couldn't help me, is there something more that's wrong? I never had a Facebook. I never had a MySpace even. And so I knew about Nancy's Nook, which is a closed Facebook. It's a private Facebook group, and it's like a treasure trove of resources of Nook vetted surgeons that basically a lot of people have good experiences with, and that these doctors are up to date on research, that they know not to prescribe Lupron. They know that excision surgery is the gold standard, that ablation and just throwing birth control at the problem doesn't help. They vet their doctors. So they have like an international list, and they have a list of US doctors that they have had patients have good experiences with. So I went home, and on this very dark day in June, I made a Facebook. I made a dummy Facebook. I made a burner Facebook account, and I joined the group, and I got access to that list of surgeons. Of course, I realized my doctor wasn't there, and I'd further learned that many patients had almost the exact same experience with my surgeon, that they had surgery with him. He said that he would cure them and help them, and then they would come back to him, and there was no aftercare. There was no follow-up. He would just kick patients to the curb if they came back and dared to tell them that they still had pain or that they were still symptomatic. And he has a very high surgery recurrence rate. So him doing 20 surgeries on you in a year is not the right thing to do for your health or for your body, for your brain, for anything. It's not, repeated surgeries are not good. They cause more scar tissue. Sometimes you kind of have to pull back and ask, is surgery right now the best thing that we have to do? So I found this other doctor who was my current endometriosis specialist, and who's going to be performing my hysterectomy on Tuesday. I was so unbelievably grateful to have found him, because not only did he believe me, not only did he not write me off, he took a multidisciplinary approach. Because endo is so much more than just a gynecological disease. It affects the endocrine system, it affects the GI system, it affects the urinary system, it affects so many different parts of your body that you really do need a team of people to be on your case, and you also need someone who understands that they don't have all of the answers to the issue. I told him everything. I showed him my reports, my scans, my surgery, my post-operative reports and everything, and he was just in shock of what I had gone through. And he said, listen, we can take incremental steps to get you to feel better, and if I could get you feeling 50% better by the end of the year, I think that we can schedule surgery next year. I think we can take it from there, but I need you to feel a certain % better before then. And it seemed like such a good conservative approach to instead of just being like, well, let's just do this big, expensive, crazy long surgery and let's see what I find. He was like, no, let's pump the brakes. Let's see if this, and this will help, and then we can consider surgery. That's what we did. I did a bunch of things, and some things worked, some things didn't, but they were all worth a try. So you had things like vaginal Valium, which, yes, it's a thing. It's Valium that you put up there, you stick it up in there, and it's a Valium suppository, and it's supposed to relax your pelvic floor. And I personally didn't have the greatest experience with it, but I know a lot of people who it's been a lifesaver with. Painful sex and painful insertion has always been an issue with me. Vaginal Valium didn't really help. But it did work for others, and it does work for other people. So that's one thing. Another thing was changing me to different birth control, to try and, curb some of the symptoms, but not to a single type of birth control did I ever have a good reaction to. So he was quick to say, okay, if it's not working, let's not put you through more pain. You don't have to be on it. Assigned me pelvic floor therapy, which really did help me. I did that for about 4 or 5 months. And while it's really weird to do and to start at first, it genuinely did help me out a lot in terms of pelvic pain and pain with sex and insertion of any type. So that was another step in getting me to feeling better and to feeling more normal and functional again. Another thing that helped me was Cymbalta, which is actually an antidepressant, but it wasn't for the treatment of depression. It was actually, Cymbalta in low doses is used to manage nerve pain. And I had a bunch of nerve pain left over from my first surgery, so the Cymbalta is I think the generic is duloxetine. It's part of a new class of antidepressants. Instead of SSRIs, they're SNRIs, so they basically target a different hormone. And it just it alters the way you perceive pain. So it was able to help me become functional again and not to be in agonizing pain every single day of my life. Cymbalta really did help me. Another thing that I tried, but unfortunately didn't help and was also a lot of money out of pocket. Through guided ultrasound, a doctor looks and inserts nerve blocks into nerves that might be triggering and causing you pain. That was so eloquent. Wow. Nerve blocks that target nerve pain. Wow. Unfortunately, that did not help me. It was actually very painful for me to go through in the first place, but it was painful, it was expensive, and I didn't see a lot of relief out of it. But, for some people, it works. Other people, it doesn't. So, again, it's one of those things that I don't knock it down because it didn't help me, because I know that it's helped other people. In the meantime, of course, even before I met my current surgeon, I had tried a bunch of holistic approaches too. I tried switching over to gluten-free, dairy-free diets. I found some relief. Some people find a lot of relief with diet changes, with their symptoms, but I didn't find that it helped me at all. So, some things you find and it works, and some things you try and you give it time, and if it doesn't help, you abandon it. I had gotten better, and I had gotten to a point that I was functioning again. I was able to work again. I was able to go out with my friends again. I was starting to date again, and I was starting to take salsa classes, and I was just starting to live my life again as a normal 20-something-year-old. And I noticed that the bleeding had progressively gotten worse since my first surgery. So I went back at the end of the year to my current surgeon. I told him, this is the situation. And he said, I think that we can do a myomectomy in January. And a myomectomy is basically removal of fibroids from the uterus without compromising the uterus too much. So again, I had these crazy fibroids had grown back and they were causing me a lot of issues. And he said, I think that taking out these fibroids will definitely help with the clotting, with the bleeding, with the cycles. I think it's definitely going to help. January of 2019, I got my second surgery, but this was the first surgery with my new and current surgeon. And it was it was like about 2.5 hours where he took out vaginally. There were no abdominal incisions. It was not laparoscopic. It was completely done vaginally, and I had almost no downtime. I had surgery on a Tuesday, and I was back to my salsa class on Thursday night. So I found that to be really incredible because my first surgery was such a scary experience that dragged out into this long, never-ending nightmare, and all of a sudden I have this second, much smaller surgery, albeit, but I had no downtime, and I felt good afterwards. And in 2019, I did see a lot of relief. Once those fibroids were gone, I found that, my periods weren't as crazy anymore. I wasn't losing so much blood. I wasn't anemic anymore. I generally had less pelvic pain than I did before. February 2019 rolls around, and I go for my post-op follow-up appointment with my doctor, and he says, well, here's the thing. At the time when I took them out, your fibroids look like typical benign fibroids, your typical leiomyomas. And I didn't think much of it, but of course I sent it out to pathology for biopsy, and I ended up having to send it to oncology at Mount Sinai. And of course, hearing those words, it's just unbelievably fucking scary. I was already at DEFCON 7 when I heard that, I was like, okay, so this means that I have cancer now, right? And he explained to me, he said, one of the fibroids came back as this very rare type of fibroid, a very rare type of tumor. And it was a FH deficient tumor, a fumarase hydratase. I'm probably slaughtering that pronunciation. It's a FH deficient tumor, which means that it's lacking this enzyme. And it could be a fluke, it could be a one-off, or it could indicate that you have a genetic disorder called HLRCC, which my surgeon himself was just learning about at the time. He's like, it's an incredibly rare genetic disorder, but it stands for hereditary leiomyomatosis renal cell carcinoma. So he was asking me, did anyone in your family had kidney cancer? And to the best of my knowledge, I truly couldn't think of anyone from either sides of my family that have had or had passed from kidney cancer. I was like, no, not that I know of. So he said, you know what? Go to Mount Sinai Genetics, get tested, and go from there. And ask around in your family, ask people if they know of anyone who's had kidney cancer or issues with their kidneys, and, go from there. So between that time and October of 2019, I kind of just lived my life. I started working again, and I was, like I said, I was back to living a normal 20-year-old life. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind. I put it on a back burner. But since about 2014, 2015, I developed, this was the first and it remains the largest, these weird little benign skin tumors, right? So they're a little painful when I touch them, just because there's some nerve entrapment because they grow to a certain size and they compress certain nerves when they grow. They're painful, but they're benign, right? They're not cancerous or anything. I never thought that that the answer that I was looking for as to why I kept spawning these large, numerous fibroids after numerous surgeries, that one of the clues was on my arm the entire time. October of 2020, I called up Mount Sinai Genetics, and I just figured, let me just give this a shot. Let me just, take this question mark and put a period to it. Let me get a definitive yes or no and move on. So it took a long time to get an appointment, and there's a wait list. So I made the appointment in October, and I got tested in January of 2020. And I got tested, and it came back as kind of yes, maybe no. I got this weird gray area where I did have a mutation in that gene that HLRCC is responsible for, But it was a mutation that they had never before seen in HLRCC patients. It was such a rare genetic mutation that they were like, there is something indicating that there is something wrong with this gene, which will likely give us a positive diagnosis of HLRCC, but this mutation in particular we have not seen yet. So I had both my parents tested, and my mom tested negative, and my dad got the exact same result that I did. He got, yes, there is a mutation, but we've never seen this type of mutation before. So our own results are now being used as part of research to revise the guidelines to what that mutation can look like. It can give people who tested negative initially to HLRCC a positive diagnosis because you revise the guidelines and you say, well, these people were symptomatic. They had skin tumors, benign skin tumors, in people assigned female at birth. It causes numerous large fibroids that constantly pop up. No matter how many times you remove them, they constantly grow back, and they typically grow at a very young age, in the early 20s, sometimes even in teens. So I had all of these symptoms, and another thing that HLRCC is responsible for is a higher or elevated risk of developing a specific type of kidney cancer or renal cell carcinoma. So there's no cure, there's no way to mitigate this. It's more of a watch and wait type of thing. It's just something that I have to be diligent about. It's something every year my dad and I have to go for abdominal and pelvic MRIs to make sure that our kidneys look fine, that there's nothing suspicious on the kidneys, to keep an eye on my uterus, and of course, like the general population, a skin exam every year by a dermatologist just to monitor the growths of our HLRCC related skin tumors. HLRCC is such a rare genetic disorder, and it's so underdiagnosed, much like Endo, that it's estimated that 300 families in the world have it, and that it affects about 3,000 to 5,000 individuals is the rough estimate, even though it's likely much higher than that. So when I say that it's incredibly rare, I'm talking about 1 in 1.15 million. It's super, super, super rare. And I was like, of course this type of thing would happen to me. Of course I have this super ultra rare thing that's been causing me all of this pain and these fibroids that just never seem to let go of me, that my uterus and I are constantly at war. Like, I have Endo on one hand, just ravaging whatever is left of my quality of life. And then HLRCC is like, well, hey, it's my turn. So it's just, for a long time, I was just, and up until this point, as I'm recording this, I've just been surviving. I've just been masking things. I've just been putting Band-Aids, like, every single month when I get my period. It's the heating pad. It's, heavy painkillers. It's all of these types of things that, when you combine them, it's like, oh, wow, I actually go through a lot. I'm surprised that I'm able to get as much done as I can when I feel so shitty all the time. I did eventually find out that my paternal grandmother, so my dad's mother, she died at the age of 40 of 5 different cancers at the time, one of them having been adrenal and kidney cancer. So kind of know where the mutation came from at this point. She passed very young. It was a very quick and swift death. She was diagnosed with cancer in January of 1992, and she passed in March of 1992. So it was a very, very quick ending for her. So taking that knowledge to heart, finding these things out, I went for my first ever screening in October of 2020. So I got a pelvic and abdominal MRI done, specifically to look out for my kidneys and my uterus to see how those looked. And thank God I got a good clean bill of health in terms of my kidneys. There were no suspicious growths. I do have a benign cyst on one of my kidneys, but it's not supposed to interfere with my kidney function. But I was told that my uterus looked awful. I was told that my uterus, that I have at least 25 visible fibroids that they can see on the MRI, the biggest of which at the time was close to 5.5 centimeters. And my uterus was already small and compromised after my first surgery, so 5.5 centimeters is pretty large at that point. Because in 2020, of course, with everything that was going on with the pandemic, my cycles did start to get a little crazy again, and, but I attributed some of that to stress from the pandemic, but, finding out that I had 25 plus fibroids in my uterus kind of validated that, it wasn't mostly stress. It was mostly these little shits growing back again. I went back to my endosurgeon, and the day before my 26th birthday, we sat down, the two of us, and he looked over my MRI and he said, "This looks bad." And I kind of knew what he was going to tell me. I kind of had prepared already to hear that. But knowing that these fibroids were just going to grow back nonstop, if we were to do 10 myomectomies, they would grow back 11 times, The only way for me to get rid of this is to get rid of my uterus. He said, by the time you're 30, you're definitely going to have a hysterectomy. This has to come out. You can't live with this. Eventually, they're going to outgrow the blood supply. They're going to cause problems for other nearby organs like the bladder and my bowels. He said, your quality of life is just going to deteriorate, and at the same time, your uterus serves no purpose. You're not going to be able to carry a child, which I knew already, and I kind of had already made peace with it in some ways. So we agreed to do a hysterectomy, and he explained that I would get to keep my ovaries and that I can harvest my eggs at any point before or after the hysterectomy. And it kind of, it gave me options that if in the future I did want to become a biological mother, I could do that. But at the same time that I didn't have to keep waiting on the next myomectomy, waiting on the next surgery, like just living in this constant feedback loop of, I have surgery and I feel better. I have a few months until the fibroids grow back, and then the symptoms start again. I start getting worse, and then I go for testing. The testing confirms that the fibroids are back, and then I'm back to square one. I'm back at surgery. And it's a very expensive, it's a very unproductive, it's a very painful, emotional, physical nightmare to have to constantly go through. So that's what's gotten me here to this point. And I'm hoping that the hysterectomy will help ease a lot of the burden that I have with my uterus, with the fibroids from the HLRCC. But at the same time, my endosurgeon is going to be looking for more endo that might have grown back or that was left over from my first surgery with my previous surgeon. So I'm hoping that this surgery brings me a lot of relief. But either way, I want to continue this series, and I want to make it, like I said, a conversational diary, a conversational journal. I want to talk about different aspects of dealing with endo, different aspects of dealing with HLRCC, and just a wide array of topics that I may list here somehow, because there's so much that I want to say, and this was just a brief synopsis of what I went through in the past few years, but it doesn't begin to attack any of the things that I really want to talk about, like the US healthcare system, how doctors can treat patients with endo, the nightmare that endo patients go through with doctors and getting people to believe their pain and believe their symptoms, and just also shed light on patients that may have more than one disease. Like I have both endo and HLRCC that kind of created this perfect storm in me, but a lot of other patients have other diseases that they may feel lonely that they're navigating. I don't want people to feel like they're alone if they're battling more than one chronic illness, because dealing with one is in and of itself hell, and having one or two or three or more is just unbearable. And I don't think that it's a burden that someone should carry alone. So I want to make this conversational. I want people to leave comments. If you want to reach out to me, I think I'm going to set up an email address where people can write in. You can write in your own experiences, either with endo or with HLRCC or literally anything else if you feel like you can relate. And I want to incorporate that into future episodes where we talk about specific facets of dealing with chronic illness. So I'm going to have different people weigh in on things, and this first part, this weird, meandering rant of a video is just for you to get acquainted with me. But for future purposes, I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be a dialogue, and I want more people involved in this. So I hope that this might have resonated with someone. I hope someone feels less alone, and that there is hope out there. And, hopefully I learned to stop saying so much as well. So thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to reach out if you like, and stay tuned for the next episode.